All right. Good afternoon, and thank you on behalf of Millie, Ian, and the rest of Ralph's family for making the effort during these difficult times to pay your respects in person or online to this unique man. I also would like to acknowledge that Larry Beasley, CEO of the Washington Times, and his wife Lori will be unable to join us in person to celebrate Ralph's life, but that they are here in spirit and are grateful for the professional and personal relationship they forged with Ralph and Millie since their arrival here 8 years ago. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Dolan, President and Executive Editor of the Washington Times. I want to take a few minutes to remember Ralph's importance to the Washington Times, and then I will open the microphone to anyone interested in saying a few words. I had the privilege of working with Ralph for nearly 20 years in various roles. Fairly early in my career here, I was given the task of editing Ralph. To be honest, I wasn't looking forward to it. I had heard him work the phones, berating sources, secretaries, and anyone else who got in his way as he pursued a story. It really didn't sound that appealing. And for anyone who's ever worked, or for anyone who's never worked in a newsroom, particularly back then, there wasn't much love lost between editors and reporters, especially a very senior reporter with massive credentials and a young upstart editor. Most reporters back then relished telling the one about the two reporters and the editor who get lost in the desert. They see an oasis, they get there, the reporters drink the water, dive in, and they look over and they see the editor peeing in the water and they yell, "Stop, what are you doing?" And he says, "Making it better." Fortunately, Ralph wasn't. I'm sure he had, but I will say it was another thing Ralph got right. As you know, Ralph Z. Hallow was many things: sharp-witted, gregarious, well-dressed, and dogged. He was a reporter, an editor, a columnist, and a commentator. But the accomplishment he was most proud of was obvious to anyone who knew him, being the husband of Millie and a father to Ian. Ralph started his career like any good newspaperman, on the police beat, learning the seedy side of Pittsburgh for the Post-Gazette. He then worked at the Chicago Tribune before joining the Times as an editorial writer. He quickly left that post and ended up covering politics, a move that eventually produced heartburn for scores of lawmakers, especially Republicans he excelled at covering. Ralph relished the fact that former President George H.W. Bush had dubbed him "that horrible fellow" in his audio diaries. It wasn't because he enjoyed pissing people off. That was just part of it. It was because it showed he did his job. He held politicians, even the ones he liked, accountable for the statements and promises they made. His unmatched coverage of Republican inner workings has been followed by reporters and will be emulated for generations to come. Ralph Hallow was relentless, and he will be missed. On that note, I wanted to read a message that's been sent by Fran Coombs, who was managing editor of the Washington Times when Ralph was at the height of his skills. This is Fran Coombs. "Ralph was like a character from my favorite newspaper movie, The Front Page. Rambunctious, relentless, profane, round the clock, and a little bit crazy. Seeing Ralph in action at the National Political Convention or hammering out a page one exclusive right on deadline, his ashtray piled high, a cloud of smoke around him, was a snapshot out of the golden era of newspapering. Not that dealing with Ralph was always easy. A lot of times his copy filed appeared to have been written Esperanto, and his designated editor would have to sit down with Ralph to decipher the message. Other times he'd deliver stories that would sail right off the keyboard onto the front page. And to say Ralph made the political powers of Washington unhappy, particularly those on the right, is the understatement of the day. I couldn't begin to count the calls from powerful politicos demanding that Ralph be fired for airing the most secret of their secrets on the front page of the Washington Times. But that just wasn't in the cards. The irreplaceable Ralph Hallow, Ralph Z. Hallow, byline, was appearing in the paper just weeks before he died. Ralph was, to award him West Pruden's highest accolade, a real newspaper man. That's the way I'll always remember him. And I think now Tom Abraham would like to say a couple words.
Well, Ian asked me to come up here and say a few words, and if he didn't recall, the last time I tried to ad hoc something was Thanksgiving prayer dinner, and let me say, it didn't go over so well. It ended with, screw this, bless the Lord to you, I guess, amen, and we just called it a day. So forgive me, I will do the best I can here. One of the things that I told Ralph a couple times in the last decade or so was my regret of not meeting Ralph sooner. I met Ralph when I was 30 years old, 1999, and I was moving to DC. I was single at the time. I didn't know anybody. My parents reached out to me and said, look, why don't you reach out to your cousins? And I go like, what cousins? And I'm like, well, Ralph, Millie, and Ian. And I'm like, well, I didn't know of Ralph, Millie, and Ian. So I gave Ralph a call, and we went out to dinner. Actually, I went over to their house for dinner, and Millie, you were out of town at the time. And so Ralph said, just come through the garage. And I walked through the garage, and I see 2 BMWs. And I'm like, huh, nice. And I walked in, like, Ralph, I see you got 2 BMWs. I just traded my old one in for a new one. I got the BLKM Coupe, just came out. The Roadster goes from 0 to 55 in 5 seconds. He goes, you want to go out to dinner in that? He goes, heck yes. I threw him the keys. Yeah, little did I know that was a big mistake. So I didn't realize Ralph had such a lead foot, and the only thing that saved my butt that night was that he had a lead brake foot too. So, I mean, there's several times I was going like, oh no, how am I going to live through this night? Like, I'll drive home, Ralph. It's okay, I got this. So that evening was an evening that I'll never forget. It was, we hit it off like we were best friends, and we talked politics, we played chess. I was there past midnight, and wow, it sparked a great friendship. And so I thought that probably from my last 20 years of hanging out with Ralph, maybe I'll say a few things about Ralph that maybe you guys don't know about Ralph. So Ralph being Ralph Z. Hallow, I made that mistake a couple of times, not saying the Z. And you know, I was looking at the 1940 census of looking up Ralph's family, and saw Aunt Bess and Uncle Zach, and that reminded me that, oh, Z, Zachary, got it. I didn't put 2 and 2 together because I'm Syrian, or my father's Syrian, and he's Syrian, and his parents were Syrian, and it's common in our Syrian heritage to pass down your father's name as your middle name. So I'm Thomas Donald Abraham. My father's Donald James Abraham. His father's James Joseph Abraham, and so forth and so forth. So Ralph, Zachary is his father. And his parents, let me say about Zachary and Bess, were wealthy and generous. They were the most generous people. My parents would talk to me endless about how great they were. They would buy churches for people. Heck, my father's father, his family was so poor that Uncle Zach paid for their house. I mean, it's amazing generosity. And the one thing to know about Ralph is that generosity went down to him too. And he was a very generous soul. Not just with money. I mean, I'm not talking about money, but in hanging out with him. And you know, I would go to CPAC. I loved when I could arrange my vacation times. I'm taking 3 days off at CPAC. And I wanted to go to CPAC just to hang out with Ralph. And so, I mean, it was 3 days, constant with Ralph. It was just hanging out, drinking, talking about whatever. Fun of my life. And And so at the CPACs, people would come up and they wanted a piece of Ralph's time. I'm like, okay, here comes another guy. So you know, we'd have this one guy come down and eat lunch with us, and Ralph would gladly bring him in. And so Ralph was generous with his time, not just with his funds, with his time. He would sit down and let them talk about themselves and how he has 1,000 followers on Twitter and how great they are. And we're like, okay, can we wrap this up here? But no, but Ralph would give them all the time they're due. And I found that to be amazing, that how he was so generous with his time and allowing anybody to speak on what they wanted to speak about. And then another quality about Ralph, which you guys do know, is he doesn't have any problem telling you what his true feelings are. And if there's anything that I admire about Ralph, was something I lack severely, is self-confidence. He didn't have a problem telling you what he thought. And that is just a quality in which, I mean, I wish I had. But, you know, when we were, my wife and I, we were about in 2011, right before our fourth child was born. Actually, she wasn't born for another year later. But anyway, we decided to sell our house and build a new home. And one of the things that allowed us to be able to do that was that we sold our house in 3 days, unexpectedly, and we wouldn't be able to move into our new house for another 5 months. So in order to figure this out, and I have my job here in the DC area, and we, at the time, my wife and 3 kids, they moved to Florida, and I moved in with Ralph and Millie for 5.5 months. And again, generosity, right?
That's a tough gig.
Let me tell you about well, keep in mind, Ralph and I were 2 peas in a pod, right? So, sorry, Millie. So I guess the last quality I want to bring up is that it was amazing to watch. And like I said, Ralph tells you what you think, and is just straight to the point. And 5.5 months, it was amazing for me to watch Millie and Ralph's love to each other. Amazing. They had no problem telling what they thought. I mean, the cold-hearted truth, and then turn around and love each other at the same time. I've never seen a relationship like that before, and it's just unbelievably amazing how they make that relationship work. And not work, they don't make it work, it just works on its own because it's a natural engine of just this, no, bleepity bleepity bleep, right? And I'm like, well, how's this going to end? Bleepity bleep. Okay, and then all of a sudden, 5, 10 minutes later, they're like, it's like nothing happened, and they love each other again. I'm like, wow, man, that is a good recipe for success right there. And it was beautiful to watch that in motion. And so, I mean, that's pretty much all I had to share. I mean, I could probably talk another half hour about Ralph. I wanted to keep it somewhat short, but I'm going to miss Ralph with all my heart. And, you know, CPAC won't be the same, I can tell you that. And, you know, our lives won't be the same for sure. So thank you.
Like most of you, I'm going to miss Ralph. I loved Ralph. I love Millie. We've known each other for 40 years or more. I'll just relate one, well, maybe 2 short stories. But I was honored at some point to be asked to come to the Washington Times as the opinion editor. And from the time, between the time I was hired and arrived, John Solomon became the editor. And upon my arrival, he said, we need to talk about what you're going to do. And we went through all the things. He said, oh, there's one other thing. You know, you're a friend of Ralph Hallows, so I'd like you to do his editing. And I said, I could leave now, or I could stay, but one thing that's not going to happen is me editing Ralph Hallow, because Ralph and I, as friends, had been fighting for years. Millie used to call me up as we were going out to dinner and say, now, David, don't engage him in these arguments, because Ralph, of course, would take a position just to take it so that he could get into an argument, and I'm almost as bullheaded as he was, and the and the result would be quite an evening. You know, there will not be another Ralph Hallow. He's somebody that contributed a lot. I was talking to Chris earlier, and his value to the Washington Times over the decades cannot be overestimated, because the one thing that he did was he covered politics differently and from a different perspective, and went after stories that other newspapers and other outlets did not go after, and he knew of what he was reporting. And that alone forced people in Washington, whether they liked the Washington Times, whether they liked the positions that this paper took, they had to get it, they had to read it, because it was covering stories that others were not covering, and it was important. And that, I think, is part of the legacy of Ralph Hallow. He's somebody that I'll miss, I'll think of often. I loved fighting with him. I loved having fun with him. And as I said earlier, there's not going to be another like him. Thank you.
When I was getting up, it took a couple of pumps there. My dad had a good 4 or 5 brothers, and they would call each other periodically. And that was always the first question when one would call the other: how many pumps did it take this time to get up? I'm up to about 2. We all have friends that, you know, we've had them for a long time, but it just seemed like they were always in our life. We don't know, you know, when they appeared or how long we've known them, but I remember so very clearly the first time I ever remember somebody named Ralph Z. Hallow, and we were doing a press conference, kind of the New Right type thing back in the 80s, and this fellow stands up. Did Ralph have a beard at one time? Yeah, just and so anyway, he stands up and he says something to me. Well, Richard, why you're not recognizing me? You're not doing this. You're not doing that. Who is this guy? He talked like he knew me, you know. And from that moment on, of course, I never forgot Ralph Hallow after that. But anyway, I guess our paths had crossed earlier, but I had no recollection of it. But he remembered it, and he was a little offended at the press conference that I wasn't calling on him and one thing and another. So I think I was trying to think, you know, if I was to say anything, what would I say? But David said it exactly right. Where's David? Ralph covered stories and gave the conservative movement publicity that we would have never gotten otherwise. He just covered story after story that we didn't know how he found out, but for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, it was good that we were getting the coverage, because it then caused the Washington Post to cover us and the other publications. But there was there are times when he did frustrate many of the conservative leaders here in Washington, but they couldn't quite agree with Ralph's take on the story or his facts or whatever. But anyway, he was a huge asset to the cause, and the conservative movement is deeply in debt to Ralph. And they're just some people in life are so big and they're so prominent that they just don't seem like they ever go away. I'm sure years from now I will still think of Ralph as still here. He was just such a dominant presence, and he made a major contribution. In Washington, D.C. and the country, Millie, is better off because you and Ralph, y'all made a difference. You made a difference in this town. You made a difference in the country.
Say a little bit of Renaissance and your willingness and Ralph's willingness to be at Renaissance with all these liberals.
In the early 80s, there was something that was started called the Renaissance, and it was started by Phil Lader and his wife Linda, he was an executive at Hilton Head, and it started small with 6, 8 people that didn't want to do the usual thing on New Year's Eve. So they came to Phil and Linda Lader's house, had a wonderful evening, and then the next year they said, let's invite more people and let's do it all day. And very quickly it became a Renaissance weekend that would go on for like 3 days. And I went in the early 80s, and I remember like 250 people there, and we'd have dinner and other events at the founder of Hilton Head home there. And it was a wonderful 3 or 4 days of everybody, people at a very high level, and Republicans, a few, mostly Democrats. And the Clintons started coming in the mid-80s. And it was around 250, 275. And then it became known in 1992 when Clinton was elected that he was going to the Renaissance every year. So people who had been getting invitations to it and been throwing them away all of a sudden showed up. So they had 1,500 people between Christmas and New Year's in 1992. And so it took off from then, and much of the Clinton's original cabinet came from the Renaissance. But I think the point that Millie wants me to stress is that 98% of the people that come there, and it's now about 1,200 come pretty regularly between Christmas and New Year's for 3 or 4 days. 98% of us check our guns at the door. There's about 2% that don't. And they're looking for Millie, they're looking for me, they're looking for Dave, and they want to fight. But it's a wonderful event. Literally my best friend for 4 days there is 4'10", Dr. Ruth. And for 25 years, I've been her paper boy. I take her to the New York Times. It's kind of hard, but I still do it. I put it under her door every morning, and we kind of hang out together, and she's just a delight. But they're, Supreme Court justices and governors and senators and congressmen, and we don't agree on anything. But we have a wonderful time, and Millie and Ralph were a key part of that for many, many, many years. And so they will be missed, and Renaissance will not be the same without them. But it was a wonderful event to be able to see Ralph and Millie and Dave Keene, myself, others, intermingling with the liberals there, and just kind of proving that we can put aside our differences for a period of time and enjoy ourselves. So Ralph and Millie intermingled very easily with 1,000 liberals there. So we will miss you, buddy.
So no profanity. I can't say what Ralph really said to me. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Kilgannon. I first got to know Ralph in 1992 during the Buchanan campaign for president, and we've been friends ever since. And Ralph taught me a lot. He was, at the time, I was younger and a little better looking than I am now, and really new to politics. And Ralph was one of the few reporters who was established, who had a great career already, who actually paid attention to young people like me, and he did that throughout his career. And I really appreciated that because over the years, he'd call or he'd email with a question or a theme or a story that he was working on, and you give your feedback. And as other speakers have said, he wasn't afraid to tell you what he thought. There were times when he said, you know, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Tom. And it kind of hurts a little bit. But then there were other times when he said, wow, that is a great idea, or you nailed it, you got it right. You're one of the few that really understands what's going on here. And the criticism made the compliment more effective, more genuine. And Ralph was one of these people who, I guess two things about him. One, he was a joyous man. He loved to laugh, he loved to learn, and he loved to listen. He worked and he lived in a town of talkers, and he was a listener. He was genuinely interested in who you are, what you are about, where you came from. Millie's organization and my organization did a lot of events together, and Ralph was always there. And there were any number of times when he was in the lobby, in the lounge, holding court in the afternoon with all different kinds of people. You could be a presidential candidate, you could be the Speaker of the House, you could be an important person, or you could be somebody from Middle America with a small business. And he'd give you the equal attention. He wanted to know what you thought and who you liked for president among the candidates and why. You know, what motivated you. And I think that curiosity was what drove him to find the stories that Richard and David alluded to that helped him to understand what was really going on in the country. And so, you know, what we've been through these last 4 years, what we're probably going to go through the next 4 years, they were not a surprise to Ralph and would not be if he were still with us. And he was one of the few, I think, in the national media who really understood the motivation of Middle America and had the courage to write about it and write about it accurately and enlist the opinion of people like me and young people. And he did that at CPAC. He did that at all the events he attended. And then when the work was done in the afternoon, it was time to laugh and joke and have a good time and find joy and cheerfulness in just the average person. And I think that curiosity that he had, that ability to connect with regular people, is what made him believe in us, made him believe in our country, made him optimistic, and made him able to just be able to laugh and have fun with whoever was in the room. He was a great man. He was a good friend. I'm going to miss him. Thank you, Ralph.
Our sincere condolences to Millie and all the family and to all of our friends and family here with the Washington Times. I'm Michael Jenkins. I'm chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, and I'm very grateful to have this time to honor Ralph. He's a dear friend and great journalist, one of the greatest, and so much fun to be with, and but also so clear about his understanding of what was right for America, what's right for our republic, our democracy, and he wasn't afraid of anybody or anything except Millie. And I just want to honor him today from all of our family at the Washington Times, our president, Mr. Dolan, our chairman, Tom McDivitt, and just so happy to be here. I see our former chairman, Dr. Jew, is here. we really honor you, Millie. I know Larry and I spoke, and he's here in spirit. His wife is not feeling well. They couldn't make it, but you're like this. So we really respect and love you and know that, this honor will never stop, this respect. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Okay, will be very short. I think Ralph is one of my unforgettable, respected journalists. For example, when I come down to Texas, Houston, and some event, so I have some meeting with 41. And he asked me, who do you trust most from your companies? Wes, he's not a reporter, he's just on top. Guy gave him name, Ralph. Hello. What? So whatever he said, I trust. He just, Tony, he just taken a memo. And that is the first, I can remember what happened to Ralph and the other. And I happened to be in the lobby area when he see me. Am I right? Am I doing right? I don't know what he's doing. But just joke, I understand that. But he said, follow me. Do you think I'm right? Ralph, whatever you do, that's best. Please do so, please. Then, just like this, and walk in. Anyway, he is really a good friend, good colleagues, and my best. Really, he's the role model as a good journalist. And whatever issue, as Ralph was there, I don't worry. Very accurate, very neutral, and good visionary, some sense. So I really appreciate it. And the Times, around 20 years, rely on him very much. And we owe him very much. And I'm hope there should be more Ralph. And if he's asking me, am I doing right, then I'm not sure. This time, I couldn't agree. I miss him. So, but I really pray for his future, more comfortable, good rest. He worked too hard. I know that. This is a time he really needs to rest. And I'm sorry, Mary, first time to see all the families. I know I wanted to share with you missing him, and but he must be go where he's supposed to be, most honored. Okay, thank you. This is actually the first time our building could have used for this, our colleagues stay here at least in one night. It's the first time. He's the first one. Only one, I would say. No more. Okay, thank you so much.
Keep my act together, or you'll get angry with me. Oh gosh, I'm Amy. I used to be Frederick, but now I'm Noon. I'm very proud of that, and Ralph would be very proud of that too. I moved to DC, what is it, 21 years ago now? And one of my very first friends was Ian. And little did I know that I didn't have any friends, so I got the courage to buy Ian and his friends a shot of alcohol at a bar because I needed to meet someone. I met Ian. And little did I know that Ian came with Millie and Ralph. And I have had the pleasure for now over 20 years of having Ralph in my life. And like Tom said, Ralph loved younger people and embraced young conservatives. And I was blessed to be one of those people that he liked. And he was a part of my family. I will miss so much about him, but most of all, his love of his family. Was so proud of Ian. I mean, gosh, Ian, so proud of how talented musically you were, and the look on Ralph's face when he talked about Ian, and then Karin, and then his grandchildren, and Millie. I think the most important thing, everyone knows Ralph and how wonderful of a reporter and what a staple in the conservative movement he was, but I knew him just as Ralph, a friend, lots of good food, lots of good drinking, and the laughter. His face, I mean, we all know his face, right? I'd walk in this room and he would be here and see me out of the corner of his eye and just light up, and I would light up, and it was him and larger than life. And I will take those memories with me forever, and never a judgment, ever. You could tell Ralph anything, and he would never, ever judge you. And he took lots of secrets with him. And Millie, I love you. And thank you for sharing him with me. Ian, I love you. And Ralph, there will never be another one of you. And I'm sure that you're going to save a seat for me up there. It's going to be awesome.
Hey folks, I'm Paul Bedard. I used to work with Ralph back in the 80s and 90s, and I'm hearing all these fantastic stories about what he was like on, the side where he was interviewing all of you great sources. Back then, the Washington Times was, a scrappy little paper, kind of a nothing burger, and, we were the first real print daily out there, and it was people like Ralph that put us on the map. We used to always complain, the AP would steal stories, Reuters they were stealing his stories because no one covered the conservative side. Like it or not, however he covered stories, we were the first to do it, and Ralph was carrying most of the water for us. So for that, he paved the way for a lot of us younger, imagine that now I'm saying that, younger journalists, and kind of what's happened in conservative journalism today. He was the first. Now, I don't really know how that happened because he was a terror to his sources. I sat like two seats away, and I can't tell you how many times, you get the phone, hey, Haley, Ralph, why didn't you tell me you're going to spend all that money for Bush in Ohio or someplace like that? Of course I care. I like Bush. Stuff like that. Well, you SOB, I did not. Slam down the phone, and we wouldn't talk to Haley Barbour for another 6 months. But it was wonderful just working next to him. And Tom, you told the story about driving. I can remember being in the car with Ralph after, we used to, my good friend Rowan Scarborough would throw these pre-White House Correspondents' dinner parties. And, a handful of us would drive down there, and Ralph would drive. And the whole way in on New York Avenue, you just hear the seatbelts clicking. one by one. And, guess what? We took limos from then on. Anyway, Millie, Ian, you're such a great guy, and, some of the stories you've told me about Ralph, and we're really sorry. I'm happy to be here, and I'm also just wowed, Mr. Jew, that you guys actually pulled this off. Right? This is the president of the Washington Times almost. Anyway, God bless you all.
Jim, you want to say something? I see Jim back there. Buddha?
Thank you. As an old ink-stained wretch myself, newspaper man, he was a favorite of mine. And before I tell you my favorite Ralph story, when the Washington Times first hit the streets here, I would go in the 7-Eleven. I'd ask for the Times. And they'd say, the New York Times. And I'd look around bewildered like, and I'd say, am I in New York? And the cashier would say, you want the New York? I'd say, I want the Times. There's only one Times. I did that week in and week out until finally I walked into my 7-Eleven in Roslyn one day and they had the Washington Times. But years later, I had, at the Washington Times, I brought Pat Boone, as many of you are old enough to know. Pat Boone was our spokesman at the 60 Plus Association. I had Pat walking around saying hello to everybody. I think it was Wes Pruden and Ralph and a couple others. And here comes Tony Blankley down the hall. And if you remember, Tony dressed like he just stepped out of CQ. And he had a hoagie in one hand and a Coke in the other. And Pat Boone's, one of his great tunes was Love Letters in the Sand or April Love. And Tony Blankley breaks out into singing a tune, April Love. And it was either Wes, I thought it was Wes, but it was Ralph Hallow yelled down, Tony, stick to editorial writing. And Pat Boone appreciated that and put his arm around Ralph at that point. And he asked me later, I said, that was the journalist in this town, Pat. That was Ralph Hallow. Thank you again. Thank you. There'll never be another like him.
Hello, I'm Cindy Lane, wife of David Lane, American Renewal Project. We took a trip to Israel. I don't remember what year it was, but I didn't know Ralph that well. And David would always talk about him. Had not met Millie. 2013, we went with Senator Rand Paul and Kelly and many others. And we're up in business class, and Ralph is there without Millie, without any entourage. And we all, Kelly and me, and then there was a friend, Kim, who was there. We were, Liz, up in business class, there was the three of us, and we were all, oh, Ralph needs something to drink. Oh, Ralph needs this. Oh, Ralph left his glasses. Oh, he can't find his, oh, where is Ralph? I can't find his sleeping pill. So, but that's the way the whole trip went. Where's Ralph? Oh, it was your turn to watch Ralph. No, it was my turn to watch Ralph. By the time I was over, we were like this with Millie. We don't know how you do it, because it took 5 of us to take care of him. But by the time we were done, we all loved him dearly, though. But I wanted to meet the woman who could do it by herself.
quick word of thanks to everybody who's pitched in to help make today and tomorrow possible. Karin, I love you, obviously. Carly and Dave and Zach, Matt and Dan, Paul and Trent back there, our friends who we've been on the road with in 2020. And 2020 has been a tremendous year, to say the least. But he was proud of the work that we did. And if it were 10 years earlier, he'd be out there pounding the concrete with us. He made that clear to me several times. Having the opportunity to go through thousands of photos over the past week or so since he passed, you're imbued with this image of him that we show on all of the pictures here, this big smile, this intense energy that was infectious and would wash over who was within a half-mile radius. You couldn't help but be affected by it. The word that came to mind the other day is his son, and that's a tough gig. You know, some people have to edit his copy. What do you think it's like to have him edit your 4th grade book report? He's a tough editor himself. Heck. No easy task to be on the other end of the stick. But the word that came to mind a couple days ago was ferocious. He was ferocious in the newsroom. He was ferocious about what he described to be the priesthood of being a journalist in America. He was ferocious about being an American and what that meant in the world. His marriage was a ferocious love affair. And as a dad, he was ferocious. It was that type of relationship that for all the tricks young men can pull, that if the shit ever really hit the fan and that I found myself in a pickle that I couldn't get out of, he'd be there with the helicopters, with the United States Army, and get me out of whatever that pickle was. And it didn't have to be said, it was a feeling. And it's so moving to see how connected everybody in here was with the man. And I encourage you all to stay connected. I think we need some of that going forward. A little bit of that passion, that energy, that ferocity, that courage, that willingness to step toward the fire rather than run away from it. He was, you know, I'll never know. This is one of the secrets he'll take with him. His true opinions on human spirituality. One day he would believe one thing, and the next day he'd believe something different. And I think he granted everybody that ability to evolve and have a different opinion from day to day. It's tough in D.C. where you're expected to hold down a position in perpetuity. But he was very flexible and very human as a colleague. He'd call himself a Christian atheist, whatever that is. But whenever he'd drive me to school, and we know what that's like, Paul, he would bless himself more than the Pope when he saw somebody on Route 50 dive in a little too closely and hit the shoulder. He'd call himself a performance driver. But what he'd keep doing, he'd bless himself every 30 seconds when he cut somebody off, despite the Christian atheism. What I do know is that his heaven was this building, this newsroom, this Washington Times family. It was what he longed to be a part of. You know, Millie and I loved him no matter what, but what he lived for was the esteem of his colleagues. That was his raison d'etre. And so I want to thank the Washington Times family for giving him the opportunity to spend one last night here in the newsroom. And with that, until tomorrow, I believe we are adjourned.